Folks, Saber4 here. Today, with a little bit more of a math-heavy video than we might otherwise have, we're going to talk about attacking the base. We'll talk about some of the mechanics of what we are doing, the math behind it, and putting our opponents on the clock. If you have not already, please subscribe to the channel. We're right around 750 subs as of this video. Would love to see that number grow into the 1,000, and I'll try and do a giveaway of some sort when that happens. But really appreciate the growth that we have seen with the channel. We'll talk in this video about knowing your target, and we will discuss the meta-impactful bases as they exist right now. What are your tools? And we'll talk about how my decks attack the opponent. For this, we're going to use our three most common decks in the meta, which right now are Sabine, Quinlan, and Qi'ra. Setting your clocks. How long do you have to go in order to win a game? We'll look at a Sabine list from Richmond. We'll look at a Quinlan finalist from Richmond, and we'll look at one of the Qi'ra lists that has placed well over the past couple of weeks and talk about kind of how they work. Talk a little bit about putting our opponents in check and what each of these decks can do to kind of get those breakpoints. Let's go ahead and dive on in. All right, knowing your target. Common bases right now, this is as of Jump to Lightspeed, are 30 health. We're going to get a reduction down to 28 for the common bases in the next set, but we will deal with that when that comes because that's going to be July. For right now, what we're dealing with is most often Tarkentown, ECL, and Data Vault. Pre-suspension of Django, Tarkentown and ECL really ruled the field, especially Tarkentown, because Django ran it and Quinlan ran it, which was the best counter that you had. And so ECL would show up in Sabine lists and occasionally in some of the others. Colossus would crop up in Cad Bane and Anakin that made some decent showings and made some top 8s. But Han was typically on a yellow base of some sort. And then the others, Quinlan and Django, both on Tarkentown, ECL with Sabine, and then Data Vault was not really kind of as in favor as it is right now. The current meta, with the suspension of Django, has shifted quite a bit. As we saw with the recent regional in France, Sabine carried ECL to about Sabine was 15% of the meta, and carried ECL to about a 15% share of all decks. But very close behind, we have Data Vault, and then a little bit more distant now because Quinlan has kind of fallen off. We see Tarkentown. I say Quinlan has fallen off. Quinlan has fallen off of some of the percentages that they were looking at when you were talking about pre-ban. Because right now he's still the second most common deck and typically runs Tarkentown, which means that you're seeing about 8%, 9% of the field, at least just with Quinlan. In the current meta, though, we do have a surge going on right now, not just of Qi'ra, but of several other leaders who have moved their way to a 33 health base. Even Sabine, winning this past regional, was on a Data Vault. And so that was another somewhat unusual, but not unexpected shift in that. But we'll talk about that in another video when we want to cover Sabine more in depth. What's the impact on the game? Those smaller pools have a shorter clock for both me when I am playing them and for my opponent when they are playing into them. The larger pool and what's really on the rise is that longer clock. Right now, we do have a card pool deep enough that instead of it being me trying to play my best 35 cards and then 15 others that kind of fit the theme, it's very possible to play 60 good cards in my deck and, really only drop off when I run to card number 55 or so. And so it is very possible to play a Data Vault deck, run with 60 cards, and have good things still in it, which is part of what's making this more popular and common. What are my tools? How your deck operates should be something that you are very familiar with. If it's not, you're not doing enough playtesting. But you should know the tools that are in your deck. You also, if you're going into a big tournament, should kind of do some research and figure out what it is my opponent's decks do and how they do it, it is very beneficial to you as a player to understand what you are running into on a consistent basis. Um, the tools that you have at your disposal are based on your deck design. How do I do the damage in my deck? Units. Do I use big units, big tall stuff? Is that it's a tsunami at the end, where I have a tall board, heavy hitters that are well known, but is often a little bit slower? Or do I flood the board? Do I get a wide board, very difficult to control, especially with one-to-one removal? Attacks are typically a little bit smaller, but can really overwhelm opponents just based on sheer number. Um, Removal and restore, things that add to my clock, things that make the game longer for my base. Dealing with my opponent's threats, and or turning back the clock in the case of restore. Reach elements are events and upgrades that will shorten the clock for me. So one-time events such as Surprise Strike, or reach elements such as a DL44 Hotshot Blaster on something that's going to stay, or tempo shifts, which that Hotshot Blaster is kind of both, because it not only is a durable upgrade to something, but it also stays on the board and attacks right now when you play it, as long as you are smuggling it in. And then we have Indirect, which is a lesser used tool, mostly because we've seen a couple of runs now where Boba Fett, who is the best leader for indirect damage that we can think of, has had a very low conversion rate and has had a couple of majors now where they did not make day 2. And so if that's your win condition, good luck. If you can make it through day 1, you've done better than most. Sabine is our example that we're going to use with the Flood, the big wide damage that we've seen time and time again from set 2 onward. It can curve out into a 6-cost unit. The most recent one there in France actually had some bigger units than that in it, mostly out of the sideboard, but they did reach beyond the 6-cost units. I'm going to use the Richmond winner as my example, and I've got in here what it's kind of built on. The Richmond winner has Williams' deck had 2 units that attack for 2 but provide XP. So the wing leaders that are in there has 25 different units, including 3 fleet lieutenants that attack for 3. But those fleet lieutenants, when they come in, are often giving a +2 surge. And so they're giving not just the 3, but they're giving something else +2 and reach for that turn. 3 of them have power 4. That's all K2SO. A couple of them have power of 5. 3 of them, all Poe, have a power of 6, and then 3 of them, all Wrecker, have a power of 7. Fleet Lieutenant and Wing Leader not only provide their power when we're calculating this, but also they add value with reach. K2SO and Wrecker both have Overwhelm. K2SO, when he manages to defeat himself as a part of the attack, deals 3 damage. And then Wrecker, as we know, can soften up his targets prior to an attack, especially on the play if you are talking about playing in with ECL, and use that for a big overwhelm. The average damage that you would expect for a cause I believe in Williams' deck is 3.68. And that is just the math of percentage of cards that he's got in there that are heroism cards, and what you're going to hit based on 50 cards in the deck. That goes up or down based on what you have played, but that's just the average if I played that off the top of the deck and just kind of see what's there. It's a go wide strategy with a strong curve and a leader ability that adds damage to both bases. It's able to run on anything. In this case, we're going to talk about dealing with ECL. As I said, I'll do another Sabine video down the line where we talk about Data Vault and kind of how this is working, because I think that Sabine is possibly the best leader that you can run in a mid-range deck. Quinlan is kind of the tempo. He's the tortoise in this one. He is a hand disruption, exhaustion, not very fast, much more event heavy compared to Sabine. but a top end that does not reach what several mid-range decks reach. So he is a little bit more aggressive than some of the mid-range decks, but not as top-end friendly as Qi'ra. Very effective in the right hands. Don't confuse that for a second. This is still a very powerful deck in the meta, and one that you absolutely need to prepare for, even though it has kind of been overtaken by a couple of other things since Django was suspended. In the 3 spot, in multiple spots in this deck, you have things that attack for 3. Cassian and Ezra in the 3 spot, attack for 3. Qi'ra and Ahsoka in the 4 spot, attack for 3. Quinlan, your leader, attacks for 3. Plo Koon is a natural 3. Yes, he has reach to be a 6 if you have Coordinate online. And Cassian and Falcon can provide tempo if Cassian is smuggled in, or Falcon, just when it's dropped, it comes in ready. But each of those, we're talking about something with a 3 attack. Really, only a few cards in that deck, and that's mostly Plo Koon, Han, and in some certain cases, Infus Nest if you choose to runner, which the list that we'll look at did not, are above that hit point. And so has a lower overall threshold for damage than what Sabine does. Has some good strong reach cards. The DL44 Hotshot Blaster, which we talked about, controls some tempo. Some Prize Strike controls some tempo. They basically get an extra swing in when you play them. This is nearly exclusive to Tarkentown. You have seen some play in some other color patterns, but since you're dealing with the force payoff of Force Throw, most often we're going to talk about this with Tarkentown, which is what we will show in the example. And then Qi'ra, going tall. This is the tsunami here. This is the big, heavy-hitting package that's at the end. It is the slowest in the beginning, but it has a lot of tools to slow down other decks as well. Has a very powerful leader action, especially if you are on the same turn and you're talking about being able to use Overwhelming Barrage on that same turn. It has probably the strongest late game in Star Wars Unlimited. I think personally that the Blue-Green Villainy package is by far the strongest late game that there is. It is susceptible at times to being outrun, but it is rarely susceptible to being overrun. You have the ability to play removal where you're needed. You have the ability to shield up some sentinels, especially, I'll soak up an extra damage to block 2 attacks next turn. And with grit units that are out there, you can really force some choices, especially as you start talking about getting into that 5 and 6 spot, because suddenly, do I push damage to a base, or do I try and take out that unit that has grit before it barrages me for 9? This can run very smoothly, even with the very slight draw disadvantage of Data Vault, just because Data Vault provides it extra room to stabilize. Let's look at decks, and with each one we'll talk a little bit about what they are, and then we'll kind of look at them against each other so that you understand what we're talking about with setting the clocks. Now, when I say setting the clocks, a victory clock is how many actions it takes me to defeat my opponent's base. And the components of that clock are the innate power of your offensive units and the expected damage from your reach cards. Components of your loss timer, how much does it take? What is my base health, something that I can't really adjust. Actions and reach of the opponent's deck, and then any sentinel, restore, or ambush units that can eliminate threats or stop threats from coming through, especially ambush units that can add to your board while clearing opposing units. Sabine. This is a 50-card deck. The average damage per card in here, when you work it out, is 3.44. The only cards in here that don't really add to that number is Metal Ceremony and Timely Intervention. Now, the trick is that Metal Ceremony is a play for free, and I can add up to 3. I can add up to a swing worth of value to my cards, just to my cards on the table, just by adding that extra experience. And with timely intervention, I can do things to really cut out some opposing threat at times, or to double up on an ambush when somebody thinks that I burned my ECL early. There's a lot that I can do with this deck that really, really packs a punch. The victory clock against a 25 health base is under 7.5 actions. And that's talking actions directly toward base, right? So an action would be Cassian swinging. Now, granted, that means that I've got to put Cassian on the board. So you're talking about 14. You're talking about 15 plays. If Sabine was left uncontested, she can take down a 25 health base. If left uncontested for a 30 health base, that moves up to just over 17 actions. And, you know, 8 actions, a little less than 9 actions against base. And that's actions based on her average damage. Obviously, you're going to get a little bit of a bonus if you are talking about, you fleet lieutenant in against something and you're basically taking 2.5 swings or 1.5 swings. A little bit more if you're doing that later in the game, but a little bit less if you're talking about swinging with one of your threes. Each leader ping, no matter what the base health is, reduces that clock, reduces the number of actions that you have to take by 0.3. That's an important breakpoint to recognize, because if you are talking about making 7 attacks against the base with your average damage, and you are able to do a Sabine ping once, 7 actions is just about enough to finish the game. You need to do it a third time in order to hit that threshold and reduce the number of total actions against a 30 health base, but you only need to do it twice against 33. And so we'll look a little bit more at this number when we talk about these 3 decks against each other. But I just wanted to show you that because a leader ping reduces this clock by 0.3, and that's static across the board, just based on what the average damage is in this deck and what it is into other bases. Quinlan Voss. This is a Richmond finalist. We have a 50-card deck. The average damage per card in here dropped, and it dropped pretty significantly to 2.68 because we have a lot of things in here like Force Throw, like Crafty Smuggler, and L337, who are all to attack. We also have several events like Spark of Rebellion and Bamboozle that do not do damage to the opponent's base. Guerrilla Soldier, I left at a 2 because your opponents can soak that damage into units. But as we look at this and kind of where it is, the victory clock, as we saw it with Sabine, was just over 7 actions, 7.25 actions to be able to knock off a 25 health base. For Quinlan, that's 9. And so Quinlan has to act against a base 2 more times over the course of a game, or squeeze that number by having Plo Koon attack at his full value in order to finish off an opponent's 25 health base. A 30 health base, we're 11.2. A 33, we're at 12.3. So he has a slower game, and that's just kind of where we are. With Quinlan, we expect that because we have some more removal and we have some hand disruption and we have some ways to slow our opponents down. But just realize that when we're talking about Quinlan versus Sabine, the reason that we have seen such a dramatic shift in the last couple of weeks at major events where Quinlan has taken a 10-point dip against Sabine from where he was prior to Django's suspension, it's because of this. It's because without the tech that Sabine needed in order to deal with the Django matchup, she's just faster. Swings from Plo Koon, if he is at a 6, or Han, are 2.2 ticks per, and then Lando's Pride is the other big unit that you have in here that can swing above its weight, but that's only 1.8. And so that's where we are with Quinlan's clock. Qi'ra's clock is lower again, in part because her overall event package is bigger, and so those events do not count towards her total deck power. even though they will remove threat. So they work to stall quite a bit. She also has a 10 card bigger pool, but she has 8 more health on her base. And so, when we're talking about acting, we have to consider that over here, Sabine is going to need 9.6 actions in order to get her base down. And we're still 2 actions separate at 11.5 from where Qi'ra needs in order to get down to 25 base. When we come to Quinlan, though, Quinlan's at a disadvantage. Quinlan is 12.3 to take down Qi'ra's base. Again, this is uncontested. He needs that many of his actions or that many of his combined actions in order to get there, while Qi'ra to get down that base needed 11.5. And she's going to do a pretty good job of disrupting and slowing down some of those things with her sentinels and with some of her big units that are able to gain health. One swing from Darth Vader is worth 2.3. One swing from Devastator is worth 4.6. And so when I say that, she's 11 actions away from taking down a 25 base, remember that if she ever gets out to, if Darth Vader ever gets to swing, all of a sudden that went from 11.5 down to 9.2. And if Devastator gets out and gets to swing, that went from 11.5 down to 6.9. And so it's absurd how quickly those numbers can drop when we start talking about getting those big units on the board and getting them swinging. Reinforcement Walker is a 2.75, and it adds to the timer for your opponents. It's a full swing on average of Quinlan and a little bit less than a full swing off of Sabine, just to drop a Reinforcement Walker on the table. So, what does that mean when these 3 top of meta decks are played against one another? Quinlan Tarkentown versus Qi'ra Data Vault. Quinlan is 12.3 away. Qi'ra is 11.5. Of the 2, only Qi'ra has Restore and Sentinel, and she has both targeted and 1-to-1 removal. You have the Force package, and you have the ability to force throw things, but if you're force throwing your big cards to try and get rid of things, then you don't have your big heavy hitters. You can hope that you are able to force throw and get Qi'ra to drop something big in order to manage to kill off units that you want. But keep in mind that Qi'ra can generate card advantage, especially if she gets Dr. Pershing on the table, and manage to keep events that she does not mind throwing away. Because that, I will say this unequivocally, force throw into a Qi'ra deck, removing redundant removal, is a 1-to-1 trade that I will accept as the Qi'ra player every time. Please force throw me if I have the ability to toss something, if I have the ability to toss a resupply. Sure, you're going to do 3 damage to one of my units. That's fine. I don't mind that at all. Sabine ECL versus that Qi'ra Data Vault. Sabine needs 9.6 base actions. Qi'ra needs 11.5, but as we said, Qi'ra can drop that number very substantially if she is able to get to her late game. She also has the ability with those Sentinels to really stop things quickly. Popping Vigilance and getting 5, delaying Sabine by basically 2 actions, can really be game-breaking, especially if it removes a unit from the board that has not attacked yet. That's a very, very powerful turn for Qi'ra, because she is able to, in one swoop, change the number that Sabine needs by 3 actions. Qi'ra also has the ability to add to her total of actions that she has accomplished just by doing things like No Glory on K2SO. It's a 0 in the calculation when you are looking at that in the deck, but it's an extra action worth of damage because I have taken K2SO and then defeated it, and then turn and do that damage to the base. And it's also removed K2SO from being a threat to my base and a threat to Overwhelm. So No Glory Only Results is a great card against Sabine. Hey, Qi'ra players, if you're listening and have gotten this far, sideboard in all your copies of that when you get to that matchup. And then finally, Sabine CL versus Quinlan Tarkentown. I left that one for last because this is the matchup that has shifted probably the furthest. Quinlan has a clock of 9.32, Sabine 2.27. And the thing that I wanted to talk about and why I put this here, each ping from Sabine, I said was 0.3, it's 0.29, but it cuts Quinlan's clock by 0.37. You do more help to Quinlan than you do to Sabine by pinging his base. So that brings us back to the idea of sequencing and how we use our actions and how we put our opponents into a position where they are losing the game. Because what happens if what's the delta here? What is the difference if I ping with Sabine instead of taking the initiative so that I can swing with a Sundari Peacekeeper next turn? Well, what I did, because these are 225 health bases, is that I brought my clock down by 1/3. I brought Quinlan's clock down by 0.4. So yeah, if I'm Sabine, I went to just under 7 actions. If I did that for the first time, I brought Quinlan's clock just under 9 actions. That feels fine until Quinlan plays tempo. And until he slows things down, until he does something that exhausts that Sundari Peacekeeper next turn instead of letting me attack with it. Because a single swing from that Sundari Peacekeeper not only is nearly a full action worth of damage for me if I swing it into the base, but it also adds nearly a full action to Quinlan's clock because it restores that 2 damage and gives me back 0.37 twice. So it gives me back 0.74. So understanding your matchup is important. Understanding kind of what you can do in that matchup to shorten that clock is important. And as we said earlier, kind of keeping in mind what your opponent's deck can do. I didn't put this in this particular slide, but I wanted to talk just for a second about a real thing that I really did in a game against a live player. And I'm playing a Luke deck that, when I say, understand your matchup and where you are putting people in check, I'm playing a Luke deck that my Tarkentown had 20 damage on it, and an undamaged wrecker for my opponent is sitting out there. I've got a Fighters for Freedom on the board. I have the ability to run that into an exhausted undefeated wrecker, or exhausted undamaged wrecker, and I've got a red 5 on the board. I have the ability with my 2 units to be able to take wrecker off the board because I still haven't used Luke's action. So I could run him off and kind of keep myself in a board state where maybe I'm able to kind of stave off elimination for another turn. That's the only unit that's on there that I'm worried about. It has me somewhat in check, even though I've got some moves left to go, just because that's where we are in the game. Now, it was my opponent's action first. He had played the wrecker and used up really all of his resources. Didn't have anything to do with the one left after he had blown up a resource, and that's just kind of where we were in the game. 7 resource turn. I still have not deployed Luke. Understanding your opponent's deck is critical. Rather than swinging in and trying to eliminate this guy, I had 14 left to go. I had 11 damage on my opponent's base. So Fighters for Freedom swung for 3 to the base. Down to 8 to go. Put 3 more damage on with red 5. Down to 5. Readied red 5 with a K turn, and then brought Luke onto it and swung for game. And so understanding your opponent's actions and where you are is also key to understanding kind of where you can keep games in check. Now, granted, if I I could have taken care of Wrecker. Could have taken care of Wrecker with what I had on the board. But it would have left me in a state where I still have only 5 damage left to my base, uh, and put me in a decent position because I can put Luke out there and I can get him to 18 and get in a spot where I'm kind of putting him back in check because I've got 18 damage on the board and a 7 damage unit in space where I was pretty well uncontested. But this is also against a Poe deck that has the ability to come out and do some things because it's Poe with green. It has the ability to ambush in and do some things that I could not. So, understanding sequencing, understanding how far you are away from win is pretty key. I knew at that point that because of how that Luke deck operates, I was 3 actions away. Or sorry, because of how that Luke deck operates, I was almost 5 actions away, because it operates on 3s. However, with Luke on red 5, I was able to cheat a full action, and by being able to K-turn and use K-turn as uh, as a ping against the base with Fighters for Freedom, um, I was able to pull out a victory that I knew I could win, just based on kind of what was on the board. That's what we've got for today. Thank you so much for listening, and we will see you next time.